Okay, hello and welcome everybody. I hope you're all having an amazing day. So today we're going to talk about how to assess all of the causes of fatigue with just one lab test. So I thought that this would be, it's very catchy, right? I thought that this would be a really nice follow-up to some of the questions that I've been having lately. So um, the reason why I wanted to do this also is because I wanted to make you guys really, a lot of times we get bogged down with the labs, and I talk about in the first section around how important the labs can be in terms of really zooming in and getting very focused around the different causes to make sure that you're not leaving any stone unturned. And while that is very important, it's also very important to remember that you can continue, the most important thing that we can do is to live in a beautiful state and continue to be in action. Okay, so living in a beautiful state means a state of joy and possibility and not being stuck in a suffering state, because you can really only be in one of those. You can either be in a beautiful state or in a suffering state at all times, and there's really only two states, so you have a choice. Okay, so if you're in a suffering state, we always want to get into a beautiful state and then be in a place of action in order to achieve everything that we want to achieve in life. Okay, and so the easiest way to do this is to not put any barriers in front of us. Okay, and so sometimes labs become barriers because you have to order them, you have to pay for them, you have to get them, you have to read the instructions, you have to do them, you have to send them in, then you get the results back, then you have to interpret them or ask for help for me to interpret them for you on this call or whatever. So there are a lot of steps, as opposed to if we're just looking at the subjective experience or symptoms, we can go through and very quickly you can figure out just by filling out a sheet or two whether or not you have a particular cause. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen with you if it lets me. So this is, from step one, the ultimate assessment guide, and this is the pages on the causes of fatigue, okay? And I just want to remind you, hide that, there we go. I just want to remind you how many of these causes can be assessed subjectively, okay? And so those are all the ones with the pluses next to them. Pluses are, and you can see the key down here. So pluses are signs and symptoms. And then the minuses or the dashes are labs. And then the equal sign is both equally symptoms and labs. Okay, so if you take a look at all of these, there are 33 total causes here, and 25 of them, or 75%, have a plus sign next to them. Okay, really, really significant number can be assessed just by symptoms. Okay, so we're talking about all of these hormones, which I can just remind you guys in a second. We'll go on to the next page so you can remember or see for the first time what we're talking about with the ultimate assessment guide in step one, where you can go in and you can determine what the causes are or what the symptoms are, whether or not you have adrenal dysfunction as a cause of your fatigue. Okay, and then mitochondrial, thyroid. So we're talking about the mitochondria, we're talking about hormones here. Some of these nutrient deficiencies need to be done by labs. Magnesium can be done by symptoms, sleep, water deficiency, good food, neurotransmitters, movement and exercise, constipation. These are some of the most important ones that we'll talk about in a second: molds, heavy metals, and chemicals, and infections. But the molds, heavy metals, and chemicals, as you can see, really need to be assessed for by labs, but we'll talk about how to get around that in a second. And then we've got the stealth infections, sinus infections, dental infections, food allergies, inhaled allergies, negative emotions, and EMFs. Okay, with the intestinal infections, this actually should be an equal sign because a lot of it can be done by symptoms as well. And so then when we jump into the next section, this is the checklist. Okay, well, you go down based off of the symptoms. If you have a certain number of symptoms and you have these labs and you have this laboratory data, this is how you determine. So I have down here, in my experience, it's very likely that someone has adrenal deficiency or adrenal dysfunction if they have 5 or more of the above symptoms, and then this is corroborated by a cortisol level of blah, 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 and DHEA levels. So you don't have to have them, which is a very important point. And part of this is also because some of the newer research coming out is indicating that cortisol is really not a great measure of adrenal function. DHEA sulfate, which is this DEHEAS, DHEAS, is going to be better, but still subjective, and your symptoms are king. Okay, so these guys really are the most important, and you can see, because as you improve your adrenal function, you're going to notice that a lot of these symptoms get better. Your sleep is going to be higher quality, your blood pressure increases, you're not lightheaded anymore when you're going from lying to a standing position, you're not craving sweet sugar salts. Okay, so very important um, to focus on the symptoms. Okay, so that's the first thing. So 75% of all of these causes can be assessed by symptoms. Okay, so then what is the one lab that I would get? I'm going to take off this share again so you can see me. So what is the one lab that I would get if I had to get a lab? So like I mentioned, the 3 most important labs that we can get are going to be heavy metals, chemicals, and molds. Okay. Now, in going through this process, that the 4-step process to resolving fatigue, as you see, as you kind of go through this course, you're going to see, step 1 is to assess the causes. Step 2 is to replace the deficiencies. Step 3 is going to be to open up the detox pathways, and step 4 is going to be to remove the toxins. Okay, and this is where you're going to find the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, and the infections. Okay, and what you're going to find is that for the 3 of those, the heavy metals, the chemicals, and the molds that need to be assessed by labs, that they can be treated really with 3 supplements. Okay, one of those is called Envirad, and it's a combination of what we do with step 3, opening up the detoxification pathways to pull out heavy metals and chemicals. The molds are a binder or a combination of binders like GI Detox Plus, or a binder like activated charcoal plus glutathione or N-acetylcysteine. So that's basically 3: Envirad, the GI Detox Plus, as well as the glutathione. So that's 3 things that will remove 90 some odd % of all of the heavy metals, chemicals, and molds that are in your body. Okay, so what is the most important lab test that I would recommend that people get? And you're going to be like, it's probably one of those 3. It's related, but it's not one of those 3. So it is an ERMI test. It is a environmental relative moldiness index test. Now, this could, if you don't have access to this, you can use mold plates, but basically it's assessing for mold in your environment. Okay, because if you go through this process and you're just using your subjective experience, you're just using your symptoms to assess all of these causes, and you use those and you assume that you have heavy metals, chemicals, and molds, and you take those 3 supplements, then the only thing that we have to worry about is your exposure. Okay, so it's your exposure to heavy metals, chemicals, and molds. So heavy metals, you'll go through the module, the lesson on heavy metals, and you'll learn all about how to remove your exposures. You'll do the same thing, and you'll be able to tell what they are. Are you eating a ton of tuna fish like I did when I was growing up and got a bunch of mercury? Are you applying lipstick that does not show up on the environmentalworkinggroup.org website that has, maybe it's a lipstick that has a whole bunch of lead in it? So do you have those exposures? Same thing with the chemicals, but then the molds are really hard to know, because you can have mold exposure and not see any mold in your home, any mold in your work. So that would be the #1 test that I would recommend. And so if it's the ERMI test, which you can get from mycometrics.com, and you can read all about this in the mold chapter, but it's mycometrics.com. and you can order the ERMI test there. It's basically a DNA test for mold to determine if there's mold in the area. The mold plates are doing mold spores, and you can get these generally at any Home Depot or hardware store where you can put them out, basically one in each room. And once again, I go into more specifics in the mold sections, and that can be an assessment. Though molds, oftentimes there's an issue because mold spores, if you're testing for mold spores, you may not catch everything because there can be mold toxins or mycotoxins, which will be caught with the ERMI. So ERMI is number one test, but if you don't have access to it because of wherever you live or because of cost, because it's $300, you can get the mold spore tests. And the company that I recommend that you use is Immunolytics, which is IMMUNOLYTICS.com. And to get like 10 of those, it's like $150. So, and if you have 10 rooms, that's what you're going to want to do. So that would be the number one test that I would do to make sure you're not living in mold, because I can't tell you how many times people are like, I know I don't have any mold. I don't want to do any mold testing. And 3-6 months down the line, we're not getting where we want to go. And I say, please, let's just do some mold testing. And sure enough, they're living in mold. And then we find it, we identify it, we remediate it, and all of a sudden life has changed. And all of a sudden the program works. Okay, so if it's not working, if the program isn't working, it's because there's a barrier somewhere along the line that we need to figure out. So 75, so here's your takeaway. So 75% of all the causes of fatigue can be assessed by symptoms, and that the one test, if I only was allowed to do one test, it would be to assess for mold in the home. Okay? And then the last takeaway is that there's only 3 things that you have to take in order to treat heavy metals, chemicals, and molds, in order to remove these things out of your body. And there's an asterisk next to that one, because some of the other heavy metal stuff, there's, to open up the detox pathways, there's about 4 of those things that you have to add to this. So, but in keeping it simple, that is what I'm saying. So I do want you to take action. I don't want you to be paralyzed by an inability to get labs. Okay, so definitely assess by the causes, go through step 1, go through the ultimate assessment guide, move through the process at a slow and steady pace. You don't have to speed through it. Slow and steady wins the race, right? So a slow and steady pace, but make sure you're ticking all of the boxes and assessing all of those things, getting the supplements that you need, replace them, ask your questions, get your questions asked, and continue to make progress, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You will find out all of your causes in hopefully in a short amount of time, but then the implementation does take time. And in order to get mold out of your body, it will, if you're not living in a moldy environment, so you don't have any mold exposure, it can take 6 to 12 months just to get mold out of your body. Okay, same thing with heavy metals and chemicals and the infection. So it does take a while, but you're going to continue to make progress along the way. So take heart. You will continue to feel better. And that's the goal, is that every month, every 2 months, you want to have an increase in energy by 1 or 2 points. Most people I'm seeing, usually every 1 or 2 months, you're having an increase in energy by 1 or 2 points, where 0 is no energy and 10 out of 10 is amazing energy. Okay, so I hope that was helpful for you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.